On the morning of March 8, 1993, forecasters at the National Weather Service stared at their computer screens in near disbelief. 5 days before the first snowflake fell, their models were projecting something the country had never seen before: a storm system of almost incomprehensible scale forming over the Gulf of Mexico, on a direct path toward the entire eastern third of the United States. What followed would kill 318 people, knock out power for 10 million households, and shut down every major airport on the eastern seaboard in a single weekend. By the time the 1993 storm of the century had passed, 318 people were dead. More than 10 million households had lost power. Every major airport along the eastern seaboard had been shut down, and the storm had produced barometric pressure readings lower than those recorded during the landfall of Hurricane Hugo in 1989. To understand how a storm like this was even possible, it is necessary to understand the atmospheric conditions that made it inevitable. In early March 1993, the continental United States was divided by one of the sharpest contrasts in air masses ever recorded for that time of year. Across the Great Plains in the Midwest, a powerful Arctic high-pressure system had settled firmly in place, driving temperatures 15 to 20 degrees below normal. Meanwhile, across the Gulf of Mexico, the atmosphere was warm, wet, and deeply unstable, with Gulf waters running above average in temperature, acting as a reservoir of heat and moisture that would soon become the storm's primary fuel source. Between these two air masses sat a stationary front, a sharp meteorological boundary that provided the first essential ingredient for what was about to unfold. Above the surface, a deep trough in the jet stream was positioned over the central United States, providing the dynamic forcing needed for explosive storm development. A powerful jet streak to the east sat directly over the developing low pressure in the Gulf, causing pressure to drop rapidly and allowing the system to deepen at a rate that stunned even experienced forecasters. On March 12, 1993, a modest area of low pressure formed near the Texas Gulf Coast. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable. By afternoon, it had begun to track eastward across the Gulf. What happened next would become one of the most dramatic examples of atmospheric intensification ever recorded over the continental United States. In a process meteorologists call bombogenesis, the system's central pressure dropped by nearly 29 millibars in 24 hours, far exceeding the threshold of 24 millibars that defines a bomb cyclone. By the time the storm was approaching the Florida Panhandle around midnight on March 13th, it had become extraordinarily deep and powerful. Weather stations across the southeast recorded barometric pressures as more commonly associated with major hurricanes. Tallahassee reported a pressure of 976 millibars. Columbia, South Carolina fell to 969. Raleigh, North Carolina reached 968. All of these readings were lower than those observed during the landfall of Hurricane Hugo 4 years earlier. Ultimately, the storm's central pressure bottomed out at approximately 960 millibars, placing it among the most intense extratropical cyclones ever recorded over the continental United States. Florida was the first region to feel the full force of what was coming, and what it experienced bore no resemblance to anything a winter storm had previously produced in the state. During the late hours of March 12th and into the early hours of March 13th, a violent squall line formed on the eastern flank of the system and raced ahead of the cold front across the eastern Gulf and directly into Florida. This line of thunderstorms formed what meteorologists classify as a derecho, a long-lived, fast-moving system of destructive straight-line winds powered by the storm's immense energy. As the derecho tore through the Florida peninsula before dawn on March 13th, wind gusts across the Tampa Bay area and down toward Fort Myers repeatedly topped 100 miles per hour. Further north along the Big Bend coast, meteorologists noted that the storm behaved almost identically to a landfalling hurricane, except there was no defined eye. There was only an enormous wall of thunderstorms, and ahead of them, a massive surge of water being driven inland. Within the squall line, 11 tornadoes touched down across the state. These tornadoes struck in the middle of the night, adding terror to an already chaotic situation. One of the strongest, an F2, struck the town of Chiefland in Levy County around 11:30 at night, destroying homes and killing 3 people from a single family. Another F2 tore through Citrus and Marion counties near Ocala after midnight, wrecking warehouses and hangars and injuring dozens. Tornadoes touched down as far south as the Tampa Bay area, where a waterspout came ashore in Treasure Island, ripping roofs from homes. Jacksonville saw an F1 tornado at approximately 1 in the morning that demolished houses and damaged the airport. But the most devastating blow to Florida would not come from the winds or the tornadoes. It would come from the storm surge. As the deep low pressure center moved across the Florida Panhandle and into Georgia, it drove a massive surge of Gulf water directly into the Big Bend and Tampa Bay areas. Coastal communities in Taylor, Levy, and Dixie counties saw surge heights of 10 to 12 feet above normal. These are levels comparable to a Category 3 hurricane, and they arrived with almost no warning. Coastal residents were under general high wind alerts, but nothing had prepared them for hurricane-scale flooding from a winter storm. Many were asleep when the Gulf's waters swept ashore. Survivors recalled waking to the sound of wind and rushing water inside their homes. Entire structures were lifted from their foundations and carried inland by the force of the surge. In Taylor County, the surge hit with such force that sections of coastal road simply disappeared. The consequences were catastrophic. The National Weather Service reported that 18,000 homes in Florida were damaged or destroyed by the combination of surge, winds, and tornadoes. Entire coastal towns were obliterated, with nothing left but concrete pilings where homes had stood hours earlier. 44 people died in Florida from the storm. Remarkably, this death toll from a single winter storm exceeded the combined fatalities from both Hurricane Hugo and Hurricane Andrew in the state of Florida. As the storm pushed inland and accelerated up the eastern seaboard on March 13th, its character transformed entirely. What had functioned as a quasi-tropical system in Florida became one of the most powerful and far-reaching blizzards in recorded American history. For states across the Deep South, the experience was almost surreal. Birmingham recorded 13 inches of snow, still an all-time record for the city, with temperatures plunging to 2 degrees Fahrenheit afterward. And Chattanooga received 20 inches. Knoxville 15. Even Atlanta recorded 4 to 8 inches across the metro area. Georgia experienced its first true blizzard in recorded history, with wind gusts near 65 miles per hour creating blizzard conditions across the northern part of the state. The Appalachian mountain range bore the most extreme totals. Mount LeConte in Tennessee recorded 56 inches. Mount Mitchell in North Carolina measured 50 inches. Snowdrifts reached 14 feet in some locations. The weight of the snow caused widespread structural failures, with roofs of factories, sports complexes, and university buildings collapsing across Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. In the Northeast, the storm produced significant totals across an extraordinary geographic range. Syracuse received 43 inches, Albany 27, Philadelphia a foot, New York City 12 to 13 inches, Baltimore and Washington up to 15. The difference from previous storms was not the totals in any single location, but the fact that virtually the entire eastern seaboard, from the Gulf Coast to Nova Scotia, was buried simultaneously. The infrastructure collapse that accompanied the storm was total and immediate. Every major airport along the eastern seaboard was forced to close at the height of the event. Aviation officials grounded more than a quarter of all commercial flights over a 2-day period. The Asheville, North Carolina airport was closed for 3 consecutive days. Every interstate highway from Atlanta northward into Pennsylvania was closed at some point. Hundreds of motorists became stranded on Interstate 40 in the mountains of North Carolina near Deep Gap and were forced to break into a local elementary school to shelter overnight. National Guard troops were deployed to rescue stranded travelers across at least 7 states. In Pennsylvania alone, the Guard reported rescuing more than 500 stranded motorists. More than 10 million households lost electrical power. In Polk County, North Carolina, 99% of residents lost power after winds tore down nearly every power line in the county. Some remote mountain communities in the Appalachians spent close to 3 weeks without power before utility crews could physically reach them. The human cost was staggering. Pennsylvania suffered the most deaths of any state, with 49 fatalities, many from heart attacks during the physically demanding work of shoveling the heavy, wet snow. Florida recorded 44 deaths. North Carolina lost 19 people. New York shattered 23. Alabama 16. Georgia 15. Tennessee 14. Virginia 13. Cuba, which was struck by the storm's early thunderstorms with particular violence, counted 10 deaths and reported approximately $1 billion in damage. When the final count was assembled, 318 people had died as a direct or indirect result of the storm across the United States, Canada, and Cuba. 48 additional people were reported missing at sea in the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic. Total economic damage was estimated at $5.5 billion in 1993 values, equivalent to approximately $11 to $12 billion today, making it the costliest extratropical cyclone ever recorded at the time. The federal response to the storm represented a significant turning point in American disaster management. Governors across 18 states, from Alabama to Maine, declared states of emergency. President Bill Clinton issued a federal emergency declaration covering nearly the entire eastern seaboard, one of the broadest such declarations in American history to that point. FEMA, which had been sharply criticized for its slow response to Hurricane Andrew the previous year, deployed teams, supplies, and equipment proactively based on the advanced forecasts rather than waiting for the storm to make landfall. This represented a fundamental shift in federal emergency strategy and was widely praised in the aftermath as a model for future multi-state disaster coordination. The agency ultimately provided disaster aid to 17 states and the District of Columbia, one of the largest multi-state responses in American history at the time. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the 1993 storm of the century was not the destruction it caused, but what it revealed about the emerging science of meteorological prediction. Beginning on March 8th, 5 days before the first snowflake fell, the National Weather Service's recently upgraded computer models had been consistently projecting the formation of a major storm system over the Gulf that would track up the eastern seaboard. The level of confidence in those early projections was unprecedented for the era. By March 11th, the National Weather Service took what was at the time an extraordinary step, issuing official blizzard warnings nearly 2 full days before the event began, covering a swath from the Carolinas through New England. Governors were able to declare states of emergency before any snow had fallen. The National Guard mobilized across multiple states in advance. Major highways, including the New Jersey Turnpike and the Pennsylvania Turnpike, were closed preemptively. For the first time in American history, large-scale shutdowns were enacted not in reaction to a developing crisis, but in anticipation of one that computer models had predicted with high confidence days in advance. This proactive approach saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. Surveys conducted after the storm found that the majority of residents across the affected region were aware of its approach well before it arrived, allowing them to stock supplies, avoid travel, and shelter in place. The storm became the first major test of what advanced numerical weather prediction could accomplish in terms of public safety when paired with effective government communication. The models had not been perfect. The actual storm deepened nearly 10 millibars faster than any forecast had suggested, and the storm's surge impacts on Florida's Gulf Coast caught forecasters and the public largely off guard. But the overall success of the 5-day forecast validated years of investment in computing infrastructure and weather satellite technology in a way that no previous storm had. The 1993 superstorm marked the point at which modern numerical weather prediction fully entered the operational era, and it reshaped public expectations about what meteorologists could reliably predict and how far in advance. The storm has no official name. It is known simply as the Storm of the Century, a designation that more than 3 decades later continues to hold. No subsequent extratropical cyclone has matched its combination of geographic reach, atmospheric intensity, human cost, and meteorological significance across the continental United States. It remains the benchmark against which all other major winter storms are measured, a single weather event that touched approximately 40% of the American population in a single weekend, and left a mark on the science of forecasting that is still visible in every advanced warning system operating today.